Hello everyone and welcome to this International GCSE Art and Design Module 2 training event, and welcome back to those of you who attended Module 1 yesterday. The Module 1 and 2 training recordings will be shared with you after this event and made publicly available in about 2 to 3 weeks on the qualification course materials page under past training content. As Nash said, my name is Lindsay Stockdale-Bridson and I am an examiner and trainer for this qualification, and I have also taught this course. We are very lucky to have Jacqueline Veet, our subject advisor for art, design and media, with us again today. Jacqueline will be on hand to answer questions you may have in the chat box or during the question breaks in the presentation. And there will also be time to ask questions at the end of this webinar. As Nash said, you may find it useful to have a copy of the taxonomy and assessment grid for reference, which will help you to gain a better understanding of how examiners mark the work. You should find a copy in the resources section on your Zoom toolbar. Excuse me. If you can't see the resources tab, then if you could look in the more section, and you should find it in there. During this presentation, I will pause for longer on the slides with visual images, so you'll have time to look at the work. In Module 1 yesterday, we covered an overview of the International GCSE Art and Design qualification, and we looked at how to understand the qualification, how to plan the course and deliver meaningful broad-based themes in response to the assessment criteria, understanding assessment, and how to present your student work for assessment by external examiners. So if you missed yesterday's Module 1, as I said, there will be an opportunity for you to look at this again in a recording which will be shared with you after this event and in 2 to 3 weeks' time. So Module 2 today, we're going to cover how to understand the assessment objectives for this qualification, how to explore the idea of a broad-based theme, how to understand the marking criteria, how to find and use key administration documents, and how to identify the support available from Pearson. So we're going to start by looking at how the 4 assessment objectives can be evidenced in a bit more detail. As covered in yesterday's session, each assessment objective has an equal weighting of 25%, carrying equal importance in assessment decisions. And just to recap, the submission of work for each component requires either images of 3 A2 sheets of supporting studies and images of 1 A2 sheet of the final outcome or outcomes, or a PowerPoint presentation containing no more than 20 slides per component. Both are equally suitable submission options. I'm now going to explain the assessment objectives by showing examples of work for each assessment objective using 1 fine art and 1 graphic communication submission. The work I will be showing you in this section are from candidates who submitted work on A2 sheets. Later in this presentation, I will show you an example of a submission of work presented on slides. And teachers can advise students on how to be selective and present their best work, remembering that it is quality over quantity. So it doesn't matter if a candidate submits 14 slides instead of 20. Assessment Objective 1. Develop ideas through investigations, demonstrating a critical understanding of sources. In order to develop an idea, students should know and understand a range of work by exploring both contemporary and historical sources of art and design through visual research and first-hand experiences. Students should also demonstrate a critical understanding of these sources, and one of the best ways is to show that they have informed ideas and investigations. In this assessment objective, it is important that students have a personal focus in helping them to produce a final outcome. Our artist directory lists artists from a range of diverse backgrounds, which students could use for their investigations, along with a video tutorial guide for this directory. We also have a contextual references guide that lists different websites students could use as well. Please use the links in the slide or on our homepage to access this information. Assessment Objective 1, Developing an Idea. This is a Component 2 fine art submission on the theme of Protect and is presented on 4 A2 sheets. As most of you will know, this was last year's ESA title. I will be showing examples for each assessment objective for this candidate submission, although it is important to remember that the assessment objectives are intended to be interconnected. So you will see evidence of an integrated approach to evidencing the assessment objectives in the work I will be showing you today. As mentioned yesterday, you do not need to present each assessment objective on a separate sheet or slide. You can tell that this candidate has been selective in their choice of images in the way the work has been presented, with a good balance of the candidate's own photography, artist references, annotation, and personal responses. It is not necessary to add photographs of the candidate doing the work, as the candidate and teacher both sign the authentication sheet to confirm this. However, if the candidate chooses to do this and the images are small and don't take up much room on the sheet, then it is fine. The candidate starts by writing an explanation of her initial ideas related to physical protection and how she explored this concept through observational studies of a hermit crab and wooden mask, with symbolic references to protecting the crab inside the shell and the face behind the mask. The candidate selected a secondary source reference to produce an oil painting of the hermit crab and describes the reason for her choice of colours. The candidate writes, "This was to depict its vivid, natural urge for protection. I use violet and blue shades to express shadows. By using contrasting colours, I attempted to create a dynamic and visually interesting effect." The mask was drawn from direct observation with an explanation that masks are not only used for protection, but also for disguise. Continuing on from the concept of physical protection, candidate is inspired by the painting Support by Zarina Zitumurang, who explores the interactions between people and light. You can see that painting on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. Informed and inspired by this painting, the candidate responds with a series of photographs where hands are positioned over the face to symbolize protection of oneself, and experiments with the artist's concept of the interaction of light by holding a small lamp in her hands. The candidate writes, "I photographed myself covering my face with two hands, holding a lantern. While painting, I accentuated the strength in my hands with prominent muscles and veins, symbolizing the ability to protect." This candidate has evidenced a sophisticated, critical understanding of the sources used in the development of their ideas. The photographic and painted compositions demonstrate highly skilled visual language and understanding of the formal elements in the context of their investigation. In this component 2 fine art submission, the development of ideas and the critical understanding of the sources which have informed them evidences fully exceptional ability in mark band 6, exceptional, with a mark of 18, which is the maximum mark available for each assessment objective. So if you have a copy of your taxonomy handy or your assessment grid, you can actually see that the candidate is placed right at the top of the performance bands. with a mark of 18, fulfilling all the descriptors on the taxonomy. And we will see more examples of each assessment objective of this candidate's work. I'm going to pause for a little bit so you can have a good look at this. There will be an opportunity at the end to revisit some of these slides if you would like to look at them again. This is a component to, excuse me, graphic communication submission on the theme of escape, which was a 2023 externally set assignment title. In response to the ESA theme, the candidate chose to design an advertisement for an energy drink on the theme of escape. The candidate selects names for 6 individual energy drinks that connect with a certain location or activity. For example, Choco Delight is best enjoyed when on a beach, Ice Chill for traveling, and Strawberry Sweet for giving you an energy boost at work. Although there are no images to show the design stages for the drink cans, you can clearly see that the candidate has digitally designed the cans to include background images and typography to suit the different drink flavors. The candidate creates some initial digital images inspired by surreal photographic images by Erik Johansson, digital graphic art by Jason Naylor, and glitter filters used in Sarah Shakil's digital fashion designs. The candidate provides some annotation to explain why they were inspired to incorporate these concepts into their work and the processes involved in creating them. In response to Erik Johansson's work, where objects are reflected into the sky, the candidate creates an effective outcome using digital media. Jason Naylor's flat, bold, and colourful graphic images inspire the candidate to create a background of lime, orange, and yellow slices in a similar style. The glitter filter used by Sarah Shakil inspires the candidate to create an effective and skillful response using digital media, and the candidate annotates with these words. With the glitter effect, the artist has added to her work. I too put it in onto the can and the rocks, which helps to show the calmness effect the drink gives and makes the drink more attractive with sparkles. For assessment objective 1, this candidate demonstrates mostly competent and consistent ability. This would give the candidate a mark of 11 in mark band 4, competent and consistent ability. So if you look at your assessment grid and you have a look at mark band 4, you can see that the candidate is falling in the middle of that mark band, which means the descriptors that apply to this candidate's work would be about half of the descriptors in mark band 4 on the taxonomy. I will explain more about how this works later in the presentation. I'll let you have a look at this work for a few minutes. Assessment objective 2, refine work by exploring ideas, selecting and experimenting with appropriate media, materials, techniques, and processes. Refining work as it progresses becomes an integral part of the course if there is a genuine desire to review and refine ideas and intentions. Students refine their work through the understanding and use of a range of materials, equipment, processes, and techniques in 2 and/or 3 dimensions, using digital processes where appropriate. The following slides will exemplify how this assessment objective may be evidenced. Informed and inspired by Miguel Leal's painted photograph, Mad Face, the candidate responds to his expressive graffiti-style brushstrokes by experimenting with applying paint on top of their own photograph to conceal the eyes, and then refines this idea by producing an oil painting of the complete composition. You can see that on the left side of this slide. A further series of photographs are taken in response to Haru Agastana's digital photograph, Shackles of Fear, and edited using Photoshop to add more fingers and refine the image. Candidate describes this process. I was interested in his techniques of darkening the edges to highlight the intensity of emotion, vignetting, and how multiple hands are piled over for coverage. The annotation is purposeful and meaningful and fully supports the visual evidence throughout this submission. Photography is used to develop and refine ideas throughout the submission, and this supports the exploration of alternative composition ideas. When refining work, this candidate explores ideas through the process of experimentation and review using a range of materials, techniques, and processes at the level of fully exceptional ability in Mark Band 6, exceptional, with a mark of 18. So like assessment objective 1, this candidate achieved full marks for this assessment objective. I'll let you have a closer look at this for a while. In response to their initial investigation, the candidate reviews and refines digital images of the energy drinks, which are presented next to descriptive annotation explaining the ideas behind each flavour. As with advertisements for drinks, the candidate wants to add copy to explain the feeling the drink would give you. For example, the candidate writes, "Lime Crush is similar to orange spice with its juicy lime and sweet taste to help boost your energy levels." Despite not showing more evidence of digital processes and techniques used, with screenshots of how the images were created, the candidate obviously used a selection of processes in their drink can designs. The backgrounds were secondary source images selected to match the relevant environment or location. This sheet evidences assessment objectives 1, 2, and 3. The investigation process shows competent and consistent critical understanding of the context of their own ideas, and the ability to refine work through the exploration and recording of ideas. So for assessment objective 2, this candidate demonstrates a just competent and consistent ability to experiment with a variety of media, techniques, and processes. And this would give the candidate a mark of 10 in Mark Band 4. So again, if you're looking at your taxonomy and assessment grid, you can see that in Mark Band 4, 10 is the entry point mark for this mark band. So they've moved up from emerging competent ability into competent and consistent ability for this assessment objective. You may also notice that they put the title on the top of this sheet, and they started their this submission with this sheet, but I switched them round so that the assessment objective 1 would show the artist investigations, and this evidence is more of assessment objective 2, refine. So there is no set order in which your candidates can present the work. So if you want to start with observational studies and photographs that the candidates have taken, or mind maps and sort of secondary source imagery, that's absolutely fine. But this is the way that this candidate has chosen to present their work, with the starting off with some refinement in their ideas and then moving on to the artists that inspired this work. I'll let you have a look at this for a few minutes.
Lindsay, we've had a question in the chat, if that's okay, regarding this
Yeah,
exemplar.
yeah.
What could they have done to increase their mark?
So they could have shown evidence of their processes, their digital processes, by showing how they arrived at their can designs, for example, some work on their typography, how they arrived at their choice of typography. They could maybe show screenshots of the process through Photoshop, and more evidence of their sort of how they their starting points were from the artist, inspired by the artist, and how they then moved on from that as a starting point to the next stage. So if I go back to this image where they started developing their ideas, they actually showed this as a second sheet. So it looks like they formed their ideas directly from this, their starting point on artist, because they've been inspired by the artist style in their work. But there is no evidence of the digital process they went through. But although it is obvious that they've designed the cans, and it's obvious that they've used images that reflects the names of the energy drinks, they have not shown the process as we saw in some of the work yesterday, where candidates for graphic communication had actually shown some very small, but it doesn't matter how small the image is, but they'd shown evidence of the Photoshops, a couple of stages of Photoshop to show that evidence, and also explained probably in their annotation more information about the process than this candidate has done. That's why this candidate falls into mark band 4 and not into a higher mark band. I hope that's answered your question.
They said thank you.
Okay. Yes, do interrupt me, Jacqueline, throughout this. There will be a question opportunity at the end of this section, but I'm happy to be interrupted. Okay. Assessment objective 3. Record ideas, observations, and insights relevant to intentions as work progresses. Undertake visual research using primary and secondary sources, and record observations, experiences, and ideas in appropriate ways. As work progresses, the emphasis is on recording as a continual process, which should take place throughout the creative journey. Although forms of recording are not explicitly mentioned in the assessment objective, this recording could be primarily visual. Annotation could also come under this section, but as I said at the beginning, all these assessment objectives are designed to be integrated. So you can annotate all the way through the presentation, your submission. Excuse me. Having explored the concept of protection of identity or disguise through a variety of relevant contextual references, this candidate starts to plan their final outcome. And as you can see from these 2 oil painting studies, the candidate experiments with alternative composition ideas, looking at different viewpoints, contrast of light and form, texture and color. The positioning of the fingers and contrast of the dark background are carefully considered. The use of vignette is also used in the study on the right. And the eye close up to the viewer in the study on the left with graffiti-style brushstrokes reflect the concepts of protect and disguise explored in this submission. These are both powerful compositions at this planning stage. For assessment objective 3, when recording ideas, observations, and insights relevant to their intentions, this candidate evidences work at the level of fully exceptional ability in Mark Band 6, exceptional, with a mark of 18. Again, like assessment objective 1 and 2, the candidate scores full marks for this assessment objective. I'll pause again for a few minutes for you to look at this. Assessment objective 3 for this graphic communication submission shows a selection of individual.
Apologies.
Yes, sorry,
Apologies,
that's
Lindsay. Can
fine.
we go back to the previous one? Because there is a question about that artwork specifically.
Sure.
They said, I don't understand how this meets the record criteria. Is this recording through observation, or are you talking about recording ideas through the composition experiment?
Where recording covers a wide range of options. It can be recording from their own photography, it could be recording from the way that they've developed their ideas in that process of developing ideas, the recording, how they use digital processes to change and experiment with different options of their composition ideas, and also applying different color schemes. This candidate has looked at different viewpoints and is bringing in the elements of the artist's work that they looked at and experimenting with different ways of recording these images, not just through photography, but also through paint and the application of paint, and also experimenting with moving the, if you look at the graffiti, moving the graffiti into different areas, experimenting with these processes. So this is why we say the assessment objectives are integrated, because you could say that you've got all three. Again, you've got assessment objective 1, 2, and 3 in this sample here. So when we talk about record, recording can be again through assessment objective 1 and assessment objective 2 and assessment objective 3. So it's not just specifically based on this one element. Hopefully that answers your question.
And I think that what you said there about them being integrated and holistic covers the follow-up question, which the explanation sounded like AO2,
Yeah,
because they are so integrated, all of the
yeah,
AOs, there will be elements of AO1 and AO3 and AO2 and
yeah,
AO3. And so I think the bite-sized videos, which are linked on later on, if you watch the AO3 one, it talks about that in depth and shows some
yeah,
examples as well.
yeah. And we'll be talking about the bite-sized videos that are available to you to support you in further developing an understanding of these assessment objectives later in the presentation. But yes, it's a holistic, integrated approach that we like to encourage, because it's quite difficult to just separate the assessment objectives, and they're not designed to be separated, because we want you to show the candidates to show evidence of a sustained line of inquiry and creative journey without worrying about, oh, is this page got to be this and this page got to be this. So we want that flexibility for your learners in the way that they develop their creative journey. Thank you. That was a really good question. So this sheet shows a selection of individual energy drink advertisements, demonstrating further refinement in the recording of their ideas. And again, the recording and refinement is overlapping in this process. They're recording because they're creating, they're developing their images and recording through the process of refinement. And again, that's an example of how the assessment objectives are integrated. So for assessment objective 3, this candidate demonstrates a fully competent and consistent ability to record ideas and observations related to personal work and the work of others through visual and other methods. This would give the candidate a mark of 12 in Mark Band 4, which is at the top of Mark Band 4 if you look at your assessment grid. I'll just pause for a moment for you to have a look at this. I think it's interesting to note as well that all the submissions that you see today and you'll see on the exemplar gallery are all presented in a slightly different way. And as examiners, we look for the evidence, we search for the evidence. We're not going to say they haven't shown all these different stages in detail, but we look and find the positives in all the work that we look at. And the refinement is very subtle in this, but they have made changes from the initial slide that you looked at with the initial ideas, and they're continually refining their process through digital processes. Sometimes when you see these images, it's quite, in a situation like this in a webinar, it's very difficult to spot those changes and refinement. But when the presentation is shared with you, you'll be able to see this. And also, I believe this is going to be still in the exemplar gallery, Jacqueline. It's quite a recent one, a recent sample.
Yes, correct. Because it's you can clearly read the writing and see the images. We're going to be replacing the ones that are not clear.
Yeah. And I suppose in these two webinars that I'm showing with the information I'm showing you, the visual images, I wanted to show you a selection of different ways that candidates have presented their work, and not all with the same formula and not all with the same way that they've annotated or shown processes. And hopefully today you'll see a variety of different ways that candidates have presented and annotated and shown their processes. In module 1 yesterday, if you didn't attend, we had some examples of how different ways candidates could present their work for all the titles. So that'd be quite useful for you to look at. And again, the exemplar gallery is a really good way to see examples of how candidates have presented their work in different ways. We don't say you have to present work in a particular way, but this will, if you're not sure, this will give you some support and help in making those selection decisions and presentation decisions.
Can we just cover 2 questions
Yes,
related
of
to this
course.
artwork, if that's okay?
Yeah.
First of all, how could this work be improved, the graphic work, do you think?
Well, they've achieved a mark in Mark Band 4, and in order to go into Mark Band 5, if we look at the descriptors on the taxonomy in Mark Band 5, the work has to be advanced, it has to be perceptive, it has to be exciting, it has to be in depth, and they have to have some risk taking. So if you look at this is why the taxonomy is quite a useful tool for you to use as well for your formative assessments. When in your teaching, if you look at the descriptors in the taxonomy, it gives you an indication of what the candidate needs to do to move on to the next level. And also, if you look at the exemplars in the exemplar gallery, which are title neutral, so if you're teaching graphic communication, you could look at an example in, say, this Mark Band 5 for photography or fine art, because the visual characteristics will be the same, even though you're using different processes and techniques and tools. So I think it's moving into a higher level. It's moving into maybe the candidate could have explored alternative composition ideas because they've got an idea right at the start of this, and then they haven't really moved it too far away. But having said that, they have designed designs for cans, for 6 cans, and backgrounds for 6 cans. So there's a lot of work in that. So if they'd had to go and find alternative compositions, they might have picked 1 or 2 that they may want to have improved. And they may want to have shown more advanced graphic skills in perhaps their use of typography or perhaps the way that they use Photoshop, and experimented with moving changing the composition slightly, changing the size of the cans so they were more prominent. Obviously, when you're creating advertisements for products, they want the product to stand out. So in the top one, for example, with the fruit slices, they might have wanted to make the can slightly larger in order to refine further and make that can stand out a little bit more in the advertisement. So there are lots of ways that a candidate could have improved this. But again, using the exemplar gallery and using the description and taxonomy is a really good way to sort of work out, is this advanced graphic work? No, it's not advanced, but it is competent and consistent. It is skillful. And that's why this work has fallen into Mark Band 4.
That's very helpful, thank you. And just one more question. There's a bit of confusion between the wording of AO2 and AO3. So maybe we could just clarify the differences. I know they overlap, but kind of the
Yeah.
differences between those.
So AO2 is primarily to do with experimentation, and you are refining work through processes of selecting and experimenting with appropriate media materials, techniques, and processes. But with recording, you are in a way you're refining as well as recording. You may want to sort of in the recording add something else to the submission. So you might want to take more photographs. You might want to add some annotation. You might want to add some more additional images in informing the creative journey through the recording process, and then go back and refine those images. So it's an overlapping, integrated, interconnected process where you're recording through experimentation, but you're also experimenting through recording, if that makes sense. But we're looking for, I suppose, visual language skills primarily, and we're also looking for the way that you understand how to use the sources that you've got in order to maybe experiment with a particular style of painting by a particular artist you've looked at. Um, so it's an overlapping process, really. The wording on the assessment grid is recording ideas, observations, and insights relevant to intentions as the work progresses. So you've done your experimentation, you've gone through a series of processes, you've decided on what you want to do for your final outcome, and then you're going on to record and refine and improve that. And maybe adding to that, you might want to add another artist, you might want to respond to that artist. So it's not a sort of hard set assessment objective. Recording comes across all 4 assessment objectives, just as drawing does, and just as showing how the candidate has evidenced their skills in visual language, I think would be a good way to sum up this assessment objective. Do you want to add to that, Jacqueline?
Yeah, I think that covers it really well. And then somebody said, can you give some examples of experimentation? So that will be, in this case,
Yeah.
trying out the different color schemes, trying out the different compositions and layouts, but at the same time, recording what they are doing in that process. And they could be then reflecting on that and trying out a different composition, like we said with this can, perhaps having one that was larger, then could also have been, it would be an experiment because it's trying out a new approach, but it's also recording that experiment at the same time. So they also were asking if for fine arts, if we could give any examples of experimentation for fine art.
Yeah, I think in this presentation today, I'm going to be showing a full submission of a photography sample, but if we've got time at the end, I think it'd be quite good to go to the exemplar gallery, Jacqueline, and have a look at some examples of fine art there. And then any questions you've got on some of those samples, hopefully that I can answer questions on that at the end if we've got
Perfect.
time. Is that okay, Jacqueline?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Assessment objective 4. Present a personal and meaningful response that realizes intentions and demonstrates understanding of visual language. Assessment Objective 4 is about presenting a personal, informed, and meaningful response from initial research through to the final piece. Students should demonstrate analytical and critical understanding as they respond to the theme. And to make a meaningful response, it is important for students to demonstrate that they have selected suitable source material and media. They should make connections between their work and suitable contextual sources used to inform the development of their ideas. And students should also demonstrate an understanding of visual language through the application of the formal elements. This is the final outcome produced during the 10-hour period of sustained focus. The candidate has combined the two compositions and further refined the composition explored in the planning stages. The candidate writes, I intended to depict my general theme of protect through protecting identity, providing empowerment and support, particularly emphasized by the clear, determined gaze towards the viewer. This final realization demonstrates fully exceptionability at the top of Mark Band 6 with a mark of 18, demonstrating exceptional understanding of visual language through the application of the formal elements. The total mark for this component 2 fine art submission is 72, which is the highest mark you can achieve for this qualification. And I think, Jacqueline, this is the first time we've had a submission on this mark to show.
That's correct.
So I'll give you a few minutes to have a look at this.
Very
This is
quick
the,
question on that
oh yeah,
last one, Lindsay.
yeah, sure.
It was, it, is it too similar to the previous ideas the candidate have? Like the idea had not progressed?
No, if we go back to this, the other one, what they've done is they've sort of combined the two. It's not going to be completely different because they want to realize their intentions through all the planning that they've done and experimentation. But what they've done is they could have actually just used one of these options for the final outcome. But what they've done is they've cleverly combined not only the vignetting, but the composition with the fingers that they experimented with the photography, and they've changed some of the positioning of the fingers, they've changed some of the angles, they've changed the highlighting of some of the colors, they've accentuated some of the flesh tones and added more colors to um, the flesh tones, especially around the eyes and also on the fingers to make the image a little bit more dramatic. But if you when you're going through this creative process, you are leading to a final outcome. And this is a good example, I think, of how the candidate has explored alternative compositions before deciding to combine the two and further refining and improving the outcome in the final piece. So if we go back to that, you can see they've added more colors on the fingers, more dramatic. There's sort of more orange tones, highlight the light on the sides of the fingers above the eye. They've changed some of the positioning of the graffiti. There's more refinement in the painting of the nails in the eyes, and they've cleverly applied the vignetting to the whole painting from both angles. So I think there's definite changes there. And again, when you have chance to look at this in your own time, you'll be able to see that. Whizzing through slides, it's not that easy for you to see. And also they've added more color to the lips to make them more prominent, stand out between the fingers. But it's again, um, I really like this piece of work, and I've looked at it and looked at, I think, every brush stroke. So it's a good opportunity for you to revisit this and have a look at it in your own time. And again, these presentations would be really useful to share with other delegates at your centres, and maybe go through this in a meeting or an inset or something. Hopefully will be really helpful for you moving forward with your own learners and doing your own assessments of formative assessments on how your candidates are progressing from hopefully from one band to the next throughout their course. Okay. So this is the final outcome produced during the 10-hour period of sustained focus for the graphic communication submission. And in this graphic outcome, you can see how the candidate has combined the selection of drink can designs with imagery selected from their artist investigations, including the bold graphic fruit designs, the ice, and the reflections. The candidate's typographic design for the range of drinks, Escape, is positioned behind the drink cans to allow for the dramatic viewpoint with the cans arranged in perspective in the foreground. Please note the candidate has used a lightning flash instead of the letter S. I remember I was asked this question once about why have they left out the letter S. So just to point out, they've done this sort of a lightning flash instead of the letter S, so you don't miss that. So for this assessment objective, this candidate demonstrates a fully competent and consistent ability, an understanding of graphic visual language through the application of the formal elements. And this would give the candidate a mark of 12 in mark band 4, competent and consistent, which is at the top of that mark band. The total mark for this candidate submission is 45, meaning that knowledge, understanding and skills are secure and cohesive throughout the submission. The breakdown of marks for each assessment are 11 for assessment objective 1, develop, 10 for assessment objective 2, refine, 12 for assessment objective 3, record, and 12 for assessment objective 4, present. Assessment objectives 3 and 4 are the strength of this submission, and assessment objective 2, refine, is the less secure. And we have covered a little bit of that through the showing the experimentation and the process stages, which is why this candidate didn't get full marks for this mark band for assessment objective 2. So to achieve marks that fully meet the criteria for mark band 4 for all assessment objectives, the candidate submission would need to evidence more analysis and refinement through visual evidence of digital graphic techniques and processes. For example, showing screenshots from Photoshop of different stages of the design process and alternative composition ideas. So I think I sort of briefly touched on that. So we're on to any questions for this section?
So there's a few questions that came up earlier that I'll go back to that were more general questions that I was saving for a Q&A section. I just wanted to bring up the specific art, the ones related to that specific artwork on the slide
Okay,
at that moment. So I'm just going to go back.
I can go
So
back
how,
to the slides, yes.
oh, and I'm just going back through the chat
Okay.
to find the ones that I had tagged. So how does one support students in documenting their process? I find students tell me they have met the assessment, however, they need more. I would love some strategies so that I can help them expand on the work and process documentation. I use the assessment grid in class.
Okay, that's a very good question. I think every teacher has their own way of delivering the course. And, you know, you might find that if we try not to encourage a very structured course because we like students to have the flexibility to develop more independent journeys. But I think it's quite good to have a structure in terms of helping your students to understand why it's important to look at artists' work in relation to the theme, as it helps them to generate ideas. But it's not all about artists. It could be that you could, certainly for component 1 and component 2, you could actually encourage the candidates to look at certain things that interest them. And I know then I was teaching this course that I sometimes sort of, when you get to know your students, it's always a good idea to maybe guide them in a direction of certain topics that interest them, and then there'll be, I think, more likely to be an engagement with them seeking sort of images or photographs, or going on a visit to photograph certain things, or say buildings or architecture or sport if they're interested in sport, so that you're actually getting the candidate's interest engaged right from the start. And I think once you get the candidates understand that this is all building information for them to use throughout the presentation, they can then tap into these interests and are able to then look at artists related to those themes, document the work. You can show your students examples of work from the exemplar gallery, um, and there's a lot. There's quite. I mean, we are updating our exemplar gallery at the moment, but there should be sufficient examples on there for you to actually show your learners in lessons and say, this is how it's important. This is why it's important to look at artists' work, because this has informed this student's journey. They've looked at this artist. Say, for example, they're interested in nature and trees. They could look at Mondrian. They could look at the abstraction of trees with Mondrian. They could take photographs of trees. They could then look at different painting applications, looking at Van Gogh's very expressive post-impressionist painting using impasto. They could, move on and look at a variety of different sources, then take their own photographs, then doing some digital experimentations from their own photographs. And then they'll start to develop an idea of why it's important to record their ideas and investigations as they go through the creative process, which is why we don't stipulate that, you have to rigidly teach, assessment objective 1, then rigidly teach assessment objective 2. But I think by showing the candidates examples, and by also maybe enabling them to tap into topics that they are interested in relation to the themes that you set or the exam paper title, would be a good way to move forward. I used to do that with my candidates, and they'd say, oh, well, I haven't got any ideas and I don't know why I need to do all this. And then I'd show them examples, and it would gradually start to make sense once they'd actually started to do the work themselves. And annotation, again, if your students don't like writing or don't want to write, it's actually sometimes it's quite a good idea just to, if they want to just write down note forms about their ideas, or just on how the work and the process that they've been going through, help them to decide on what to do next. So a purposeful approach to, I've done this study, this gave me the idea to do this. So I looked at this artist, which gave me the idea to do this. And they could do it in note form. But usually it's very obvious to the examiner that they've actually gone through this process without writing notes. I don't know if you want to add to that, Jacqueline. I think it's very much every teacher and every centre has a slightly different approach, but we have
Yeah.
schemes of work, we have exemplars, lots of information to support you.
Yeah, I found showing the students as many different examples as possible really helped them. And also the Facebook group that we've just started, which will be linked later on at the end of this training, is really supportive. People are sharing lots of resources already, so that you can get some ideas of how to cover that with them as well. Yeah, talking to other teachers and showing students as much visual work as possible always, it seemed to click, because a lot of them were so used to rote learning or written assessments that they really struggled with this more open visual approach to a course. So yeah, just showing them as much as possible. There's a few other questions that have popped up as well, Lindsay. So could I ask, how does the student show the breadth of their development and experimentation and overall project by only submitting 4 A2 sheets? I know you can submit presentations of 20 slides, but is it that you are being fully selective of what to present to the examiner?
That's a very good question. Thank you. Excuse me, got a bit of a sort of sore throat this morning. The when you, if we look back at the, if I just whiz back to this presentation and where it starts, this has been submitted on 4 A2 sheets, but the candidate has digitally presented the work. So they have able to present the sheets digitally by composing an arrangement of images with annotation, and they've been able to type their annotation. If you are photographing the A2 sheets, the candidate's just literally cutting work out of a sketchbook and applying them to the page. You could photograph their work, and then you could have room to put all the different stages into the sheet. So you could have a lot more. There's actually a lot going on in this sheet here. You've got a lot of photographs. They're not huge because the candidate wanted to focus on showing her visual responses, her drawings and her paintings a lot on a larger scale. But you can still see artist references, you can still see photographs and annotation. There's an awful lot that has been fitted into this. And you could do this with your sheets as well by just photographing the work, and then you can have whatever size you want on the sheets. Again, the option for slides. Some people prefer to submit work on slides, but you're not going to be penalized if you do 4 A2 sheets. We're looking for the quality of the work, and you can still submit a lot of information on those A2 sheets. It's a preference of the centre and a preference of the candidate. But again, look at the exemplar gallery. You'll see lots of examples of different presentations on sheets in there, as well as slide presentations. But yeah, this is, I think, a good example. We had some examples yesterday on presentation, and how the candidates have presented their sheets and slides. So those those are on the exemplar gallery, the ones I showed yesterday, and obviously you can look back on the recording to see those. So yeah, photograph the work, make them smaller, because what we want to see, we want, this is a visual qualification. We want to see visual work. We want to see the candidate's own work and the candidate's own photography. But we can still see the quality of the photographs, even though they're quite small on this sheet. It shows the evidence of the candidates, how the candidates investigated and progressed with their development of ideas. And there's an awful lot on that sheet.
I think also A2 sheets versus slides, like you said, comes down to center preference. And what I find is that the manual process of taking the artwork and collating it onto the A2 sheets is a preferred approach by some centers, which is why they'll choose that, whereas other centers will prefer to take the photographs, put them into the slides, add typed annotation. I mean, obviously annotation is only ever in support of the visual work, not a replacement of, but if it is included, they prefer to type it. So it just very much depends on whether they like that more manual approach of cutting and sticking it and then photographing the A2 sheets, or collating it digitally, whatever works best for their learners, and either are equally as acceptable. And
Yeah.
remember, it's quality over quantity as well. Another question, Lindsay, you mentioned that you really liked the final painting of that student. How much does personal opinion of the examiner affect the grade? How can we be specific about grading if there is subjectivity involved?
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. No, we look at the work completely objectively, and we look at the qualities of the visual language, and we look at the qualities of the of the work presented. As you can imagine, we get a huge range of submissions. We get a lot of different work from different countries, which is, it's just such a privilege to look at. But I only mentioned that I particularly like this one because as an artist myself, I used to do a lot of portraiture. So it's just, but there's no way that this would influence my preferences, would influence the decision I made on an artwork. We always try and see the best in every submission that we look at. It's not, that's why the work is marked by, one of the reasons that it's good to have the mark worked externally is that we don't know the candidates. We see the work objectively. We mark it objectively. We always try and see the best in the candidate's work and look for that evidence. But no, there's no subjective influences in the way that we mark the work at all.
And I think also in art design, the way that we develop our qualification is to make what could be a really subjective subject objective. And the way that we do that is through the triangulation of the assessment resources. And those are the assessment grid, which is the formal form that has the assessment objectives on it, the taxonomy, which gives objective descriptors for each of the performance bands and a very objective process to follow, and the exemplar gallery. So between those three bits of evidence and data, the standardization training of examiners, you are able to remove that kind of subjective bias from the process, because even though it's a kind of a qualitative assessment, it is pinned to these very specific criteria.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that's why we call it assessment objectives as well, because
Yes.
we're looking at the work objectively, and all the examiners are highly trained to follow the marking criteria, which I will be going on to talk about in this presentation.
Couple more questions that are quite quick. Do we need to see a specific amount of different layouts and processes? And I'll answer that, and it's a no, because it's every student's project will be different, and there's no specified number or magic number. And that ties in well with the other question around for the fine art student just referred to one artist. Is this okay? I have always insisted on 3 artists. Again, it's not about a specific number, and it's very much how they use their contextual references. Also, contextual references don't always have to be artists as well. So it could be inspiration from more conceptual or media-based contextual references. It doesn't just have
Yeah.
to be artists, but either approach is completely fine.
Yeah, and this fine arts student did look at more than one artist and looked at photographer for vignetting and some digital art. So, yeah, I mean, we don't stipulate how many artists, but it's not all about artists anyway, as Jacqueline's just said. It's what's necessary, I suppose, to inform and inspire the candidate's creative journey.
And then here's a question for you, Lindsay. Oh, sorry. Is that
No, it's
you
fine.
time for? I'm finding the lack of background compositional consideration in a lot of the exemplars. I'm also concerned about the exciting criteria, as this is very subjective. I would like to also ask about the use of collage, scale, videography, and sculpture being credited in the AO2 section, especially seeing the 72 out of 72 example, which was quite a traditional in its approach. So a few things there. So the background composition of exemplars, the exciting criteria, and the crediting of non-traditional media for AO2.
Yeah, so sorry, could repeat the first bit first, the first
So
part.
I think I can answer the first one actually.
Yeah,
So
okay.
the background compositions of the exemplars. Do you mean by the slide presentation? Because in art and design, they are not awarded for the presentation of their work. They are awarded for the content of their artwork. So I remember my students used to spend loads of times on these beautiful backgrounds, but they didn't relate to the content of the work at all, and actually weren't necessary. Really, they should have spent that time on developing their visual language, their artwork, their ideas for their outcomes. So I wouldn't worry about the backgrounds. I'm hoping that was answering that question there. And then the second one is the exciting criteria. It feels very subjective.
Yeah, I think we would look as examiners at exciting something that's unusual, maybe quite original, something where the candidate has taken that extra leap into their investigation where a less literal approach, but also trying to experiment with lots of alternative ways to improve the composition and to introduce new elements to it. And particularly when we get to AO4, sometimes the candidates, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, will make changes in that final piece. And sometimes they add things that makes the piece a little bit more exciting in terms of visual power and slightly unexpected. So if we're looking at the taxonomy again for this performance level 6, we're looking at also sort of outstanding, unexpected, powerful, and all those sort of all in a similar way linked to exciting. But exciting in performance band 5 means that the candidate is just doing something a slightly less, maybe literal, maybe introducing a more dynamic, interesting element to their work, which is, I suppose, an unusual and original stage of development, which maybe the examiner, was not expecting. And we all know as artists, you can see work that is visually exciting, that sort of stimulates the perception and the and is more insightful, that we look for. But again, we don't get too bogged down with these specific words. What we're looking for is finding the holistic visual evidence for the body of work. Um, and so exciting can come into all those assessment objectives in the way that looking at maybe more contemporary, less known artists that the candidate has investigated, selected, and found, and the way that the candidates experimented with their work, with their different processes, could be very exciting. In the way that they're experimenting and their use of materials could be exciting, like inventing new ways of doing things, like sheen doing sheen collage or any things that adding new materials to, say, a print making process, or combining different photographic techniques with cyanotypes and digital. So, all these things sort of, I think, lead on to more exciting responses. Um,
Excellent, thank you. And I think to answer the question around the AO2, while this was a traditional art approach that would this student take, any media techniques and processes are acceptable, whether it's collage, sculpture, videography, and it will always be about that creative journey, and rather than the specific media itself. And any media can and lend itself to a 72 out of 72 as well. In fact, we have an exemplar for component 1, I believe, or I can't remember, of hands in the gallery that is a 72 out of 72, and they are using more graphical media that then lead on to a painted outcome. Well, I'm wary of time. I think there's just one more question from what I can see here. For component 1, should I offer my students more than one theme? I realize this is up to the center, but what do most people do? Can they work on more than one project? For example, 4 months on each for 2 projects. When in the year do most people start on their final component 1 project?
okay, well, centres can choose obviously when they start their project, but it varies. It obviously depends on your centre and on the time that you've got allocated for lessons, and the number of students you have in a class. I mean, it's all relative, but basically, for component 1 and for component 2, it's very important that for component certainly what component 1, that the skills that form the development in terms of the candidate's understanding of the materials for whichever title they are doing, that they have the opportunity at the beginning of the course to maybe follow some foundation course where they're learning some of the basic core skills. For example, drawing, observational drawings, so photography skills. Depends obviously on what title you're following, but I think it's entirely up to the centre. Some choose to do one project based on, as I've just said, skill based, sort of having an experimenting with a range of different processes and media techniques, and then maybe doing a past exam title, which is quite helpful because then they get to follow past exam paper and get to experience and understand how to do that and how to evidence the assessment objectives. And if you could have a mock exam at some point during component 1 so that the candidates actually get to experience how much work they could complete in the 10-hour period, is always very helpful. Again, it's entirely up to the centre. Some people do 2 projects, and submit one project that's the strongest and the best, that shows more evidence of the assessment objectives and is the better quality in terms of the quality of the visual language and the work. and some centres would do 3 projects. I think, again, you know your candidate, you know your students, you know your learners. Um, different students have different work ethics, so some might get 3 projects completed, and some students might get 2 completed. It doesn't matter. It's, you know, if the student has only done 2 projects, just submit the best. And if they maybe finish one project, you could give them something else. The themes that you choose, again, there's some really good ones to look at on the exemplar gallery that you could look at, which are really helpful to see what other candidates have done for component one. And also on the homepage, you can look back at all the previous past ESA exam papers, which you could just go through and see which one might suit your candidates well. And select an old exam paper that you feel would work. It's entirely up to you, and everybody doing international GCSE art, their term times are different, and the number of hours they have allocated to this subject are different. So we don't actually stipulate how many projects, but just give the candidates enough chance, enough opportunity to develop the skills that they need to then go on and do the ESA with those skills in place, where those candidates will feel more confident that they've had that opportunity throughout component one to develop their knowledge, understanding, and skills. I think that would be my recommendation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
So we're going to look at understanding the marking criteria. And we're going to be looking at a component one photography submission presented on slides. And each slide will have a brief explanation of the candidate's work and how they evidenced the assessment objectives. So just to remind you of what the taxonomy looks like, we covered how examiners would use the descriptors of taxonomy to decide which mark band best fits the visual characteristics of the work, and then decide whether each assessment objective just, mostly, or fully meets the standard for this mark range using the assessment grid and exemplar standards in the exemplar gallery. So there's 3 points of assessment examiners would use. They would look at the taxonomy to start with to find which of the descriptors in these 6 mark bands most um, most best fits the visual characteristics of the student's work. So, for example, they might look at a candidate's work and think, is this informed? Yes. Is it purposeful? Yes. Is it diverse? Yes. Is it sustained? Yes. Is it skillful? Yes. Is it effective? Yes. The examiner would then go and look at the descriptors in Mark Band 5 and see if any of those apply to the student's work. If some of those apply, but not all of them, then the examiner would then go to the assessment grid and then fine-tune their marks using the assessment grid, bearing in mind that they feel that the visual characteristics of your learner's work fits into confident and assured, and possibly because it's advanced, it's more than skillful, it's advanced, it's in depth, and it's fully resolved. So bearing in mind they think that those 3 descriptors apply to this work, they're probably looking at a mark of around, say, 54, 55. But in order to fine-tune that mark and make sure that that is accurate, they then go on to the assessment grid. And then by looking at this assessment grid, they will look at the each of those bands within mark band 5 and decide whether assessment objective 1 is just, mostly, or fully, and assessment objective 2, etc. One thing that examiners often do is they look at the strength of the submission, and sometimes all assessment objectives are equally weighted in terms of the strength. Sometimes we find that maybe the development of ideas is less secure, so they might get a mark of 13. But the final outcome is it fits the criteria for advanced, so it's fully, so it would gain a mark of 15. Once the examiner has placed the marks in the right place at this stage for the candidate, they would then go onto the exemplar gallery and have a look and make comparisons with candidates' marks around that final mark to make a mark decision. If they feel the candidate mark should be higher in a particular assessment objective, they would then move the mark up higher. So, for example, if they feel that assessment objective 4 meets the highly skilled criteria of exceptional ability for assessment objective 4, but doesn't for the other 3 assessment objectives, then the candidate may get a mark of 16 for AO4. So the marks can go either below in the mark band below, or in the mark band where they feel that most of the descriptors apply, or it could just tip in to the next mark band for a particular assessment objective or assessment objectives. So centres could gain a better understanding of assessment if you use the taxonomy, assessment grid, and publish standard exemplars for your formative assessment, feedback, and reporting throughout the course. And then you would gain a better understanding yourself using these 3 points of assessment for when it comes to submitting your marks for assessment and getting your candidates' results back. So this component 1 photography submission is presented for assessment on 20 slides on the theme of distortion. Obviously, the candidate used all 20 slides for this, but as I've said earlier, you don't need to submit the full 20 slides if you don't feel that all the work is of the quality that you would like to be submitted. And remember, the 20 slides is the absolute maximum permitted for each component for this qualification. In the submission, the candidate chose to present each slide with a similar format on a black background with white text. The work is arranged in a clear, methodical order and clearly demonstrates the candidate's selective approach in their choice of images. The candidate introduces their theme of distortion by creating a visual mind map of secondary sources with references at the bottom of the slide of the websites used to find the images. Producing a bibliography of artists and secondary source references is not a requirement, but if the candidate chooses to do this, it is fine as long as it does not dominate space that could be used for visual evidence. A written mind map outlines a candidate's initial ideas in relation to the theme, including movement, texture, and viewpoints. The candidate includes a quotation about distortion in art. The candidate writes, in the art world, the term distortion is used to describe any change made by the artist to the image, size, or visual character of a form to express an idea, convey a feeling, or enhance visual impact. The candidate starts by investigating the work of contemporary artist and photographer Andy Pentherer, who focuses on the digital distortion of geometric shapes in the environment. As you can see, the candidate produces a planning sheet to explain their intentions for a photo shoot, and a contact sheet of the shoot, images of Andy Pentherer's work, and a screenshot of the digital processes used in Photoshop to create their personal responses informed by the photographer's work. This is a good example of how candidates integrated assessment objectives 1, 2, and 3, as they have developed ideas through investigations demonstrating a critical understanding of sources. They've refined work by exploring ideas and selecting, experimenting with appropriate media, materials, techniques, and processes, and recorded ideas, observations, and insights relevant to intentions as their work progresses. I'm just pausing for you to have a quick look. The experimentation in response to Andy Pentherer's work. The candidate continues to refine their ideas through a process of experimentation in response to Andy Penthra's distorted architectural digital photography. And the candidate returns to the initial idea of distorted portraits as shown on the visual mind map on the introductory slide, and combines a portrait taken on a school trip with one of their architectural digital photographs. The candidate explains the process by annotating. I duplicated the image and merged them together to be working in the same style as Andy Penthra. I flipped the image and changed the adjustments on the brightness levels of the selected images for the image to look more appealing. Again, the candidate is evidencing assessment objectives 1, 2, and 3. The candidate continues to develop their ideas through investigating the photographic work of British artist Brendan Neelan, who is best known for his photographs of reflections in modern city buildings. Annotation about the artist is quite biographical as it mainly focuses on the artist's life and education. As annotation is not a requirement for this qualification, it is important to remember that annotation should be used to support the visual evidence by explaining ideas, feelings, observations, and processes that may not be obvious to the examiner. This candidate produces descriptive and purposeful annotation throughout their submission. In the same format as the previous artist investigation, the candidate produces a planning sheet, a contact sheet of their photo shoot, and screenshots to document part of their experimentation process using Photoshop. The candidate produces 3 digital photographs in response to the reflective visual characteristic of Neelan's work. And the annotation demonstrates a critical understanding of these sources and explains ways that they could improve their work by reviewing and refining. As you can see, the candidate continues to develop their ideas using the same planning formula as before, with an artist investigation, photography shoot, followed by responses to the artist's work using Photoshop. And in response to Cuban photographer Darian Rodriguez Madeiro's Obscura series of photographs and his use of bubble wrap to reflect light and distort the underlying image, the candidate adopts the same process to distort their portrait photographs using a selection of viewpoints. Annotation supports the visual evidence by explaining the reason for choosing the photographer's work in relation to the theme of distortion, an analysis of the process used to experiment with light on the bubble wrap. Please note there is not a set number of artists students need to study as part of their investigation, as they may also use primary and secondary source material to inspire their investigation. The candidate evaluates their own responses to the 3 photographers' work who have inspired and informed the development of their ideas so far in this Component 1 project. And the next few slides clearly evidence how the candidate continues to develop and refine their ideas by combining layers of images already produced in response to their contextual references. And you will notice that the candidate has labelled their responses Development 1, Development 2, etc. as we go through. The candidate has chosen this way of documenting their line of inquiry to demonstrate the order in which their work was produced. And candidates may reference the different stages in their creative journey if it helps them to evidence the progression of their work and evidence the assessment objectives clearly. Several outcomes are produced demonstrating a confident and assured ability to explore ideas through a process of experimentation and review, and an ability to record ideas relevant to personal work and the work of others. Continuing to develop ideas in the latter stages of the project, the candidate investigates the work of Mexican fashion photographer Juma Herrera and is inspired by the way he distorts figures using layers of images and color filters to enhance the image of the outcome. The candidate experiments with Herrera's style using their own photographs and Photoshop to add the layers of different images and colors. This is a good example of how Candidate can continue to introduce artists throughout their project as their ideas develop and change direction. And throughout this submission, the candidate evidences a very clear, sustained line of inquiry, and their knowledge, understanding, and skills are effective and focused throughout. The candidate experiments further with the formal elements of composition: line, shape, form, space, movement, tone, and color. They introduce circles in reference to the shape of the raised circles on the bubble wrap and include a screenshot as evidence of a stage of this process. This work will underpin the preparation of their final response. Throughout this Component 1 photography submission, the candidate selected relevant images and screenshots to evidence process and progress. The work demonstrates a comprehensive and exciting creative journey with all assessment objectives evidenced clearly. And the candidate continues to develop composition ideas in portrait and landscape formats and introduces layers of overlapping circles of varying sizes into the composition. A black and white portrait is added to differentiate between the bright overlapping layers of colour in the rectangular background and the contrast of monochrome tints and tones of the portrait in the centre. The candidate produced two final realizations that demonstrates a confident and assured understanding of visual language through application of the formal elements. This submission evidences all the assessment objectives with a confident and assured ability, which places this work securely in Mark Band 5 with a mark of 56. As you can see on the taxonomy, the descriptors which apply to the visual characteristics of this submission are comprehensive, exciting, and fully resolved in Performance Band 5, confident and assured. So this is a good example of that word exciting that we were just discussing earlier. This slide shows the breakdown of the marks where assessment objective 4 is the strength of the submission. And the candidate shows clear engagement with the work of established photographers, but taking greater creative risks in the development of ideas could lead to a more advanced and in-depth investigation, enabling the candidate to be placed higher within this mark band. We can take some brief questions now because we have got quite a bit more to go through, and I'm very aware of the time ticking along. Are there any questions, Jacqueline?
Nothing's come up in the chat, just some questions that I was able to answer through text.
Brilliant. If we have time at the end, we can go back to some of the slides and answer the questions, but we've still got a fair amount of slides to get through. Thank you. How to use broad-based themes. I'm now going to explain how to use broad-based themes, which basically is questions we get asked a lot on, as we've just been asked today, in fact, on different themes that centres could use, particularly in their, obviously, when they're trying to design a course for Component 1. So our aim with International GCSE is to support your teaching by encouraging creativity, independence, and progression. The course develops transferable skills, and we all know that studying art and design allows students to develop valuable transferable skills, such as the ability to apply a creative approach to problem solving, consider and develop original ideas, analyze critically their own work and others' work, and express individual thoughts and choices confidently. Take risks, experiment, and learn from mistakes. And for Component 1, we want to give you flexibility and choice to design a course of study that appeals to your students and draws on your expertise and the resources you have available in your department. So for planning and delivering your course, you need to decide which of the International GCSE Art and Design titles to offer. Students must work in the same title for both components. You then need to plan a course that gives students the opportunity to work in an appropriate area or areas of study, and more detail can be found in our specification on what different areas of studies you can use for each of our titles. You'll all have seen this year's exam paper and will see that we provide a visually engaging and accessible externally set assignment for Component 2 with a broad-based theme, as we've got intertwined this year, which I'm sure you've all probably started working on. Students can feel confident completing ESA with these themes because they are broad-based, so it allows a lot of scope for candidates to tap into their independent and individual interests and knowledge that they have built up throughout their studies in Component 1. This is an opportunity for them to refine their knowledge, understanding, and skills developed throughout the course. And the exam paper provides several helpful starting points with images of artwork that are designed to encourage and inspire initial ideas. And in yesterday's module, I showed you a slide of the new Component 2 video, a bite-sized video that Jacqueline has produced, which is available for you to look at. And you could also use this again, as I say, in department meetings and and share that with your other colleagues, so that it will give you a lot of helpful advice on how to structure this period, supporting studies, and also some ways that you should conduct the 10-hour period of sustained focus. So as I've already explained, you may choose to give your students a mock exam in Component 1, which is helpful for giving them the experience of the 10-hour period of sustained focus. And as I said, it helps the students to develop and explore ideas, researching primary contextual sources, experimenting with media, materials, techniques, and processes, presenting a personal response within this mock exam experience. And students could then be given the opportunity to improve their mock exam assignment after being given feedback from their teacher. The work produced during the mock exam, if it's the strength of the candidate's work, could be submitted for a project for their Component 1 personal portfolio. Any questions on the exam paper?
Just really quick question, in terms of component 1 and 2, do you have to use a theme for component 1 that Pearson specifies, or is this led by the center? That is correct. It is led by the center. Some centers choose to use past paper themes, but you choose completely over component 1 what theme or themes you set and which project to submit for component 1, because only one project is submitted for component 1 if you do multiple projects. And then for component 2, it is the externally set theme on the paper. And then there was one other question for photography and textiles. Would it be beneficial to show situational use or purpose, such as a room divider? I'm not quite sure what that question means. Do you mean that it needs to be an outcome? Are you asking whether it needs to be an outcome that is like a product or a use? I wasn't sure.
Maybe we can come back to that at the end of the presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you. So how to find and use key administration documents. If you attended yesterday's module 1, Jacqueline very helpfully shared the homepage and went through quite a lot of this yesterday. So I'm just going to go through this for the benefit of those that weren't in the module 1 yesterday. First of all, understanding the grading structure. Our international GCSE qualifications follows the same grading structure as our UK GCSE qualifications. They're graded using the 9-to-1 grading scale, 9 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And once a student submission has been marked by the examiner, the marks for each component are added together for a total subject mark, and a grade is then awarded based on the total mark. For grade boundaries, please refer to the grade boundaries document for the relevant year on our website, and the link is in the slide. We're now going to look at some key administrative documents. The Administrative Support Guide can be found under Course Materials, Forms and Administration, and Guidance for Centres on the International GCSE Art Design subject page. And the Digital Submission Guide is included in the Administrative Support Guide. So I've just shown you screenshots of the first page of the Administrative Support, sorry, it's a difficult word to say, Administrative Support Guide. And the Digital Submission Guide is within this document, and I urge all of you to read this because it's a digital submission qualification, and there are very, very helpful guidance in there on different file formats, etc., on how you submit the candidate's work. Okay, the authentication sheet, unofficial intelligence. All submissions must include authentication sheets for every candidate for both components. So when you submit the work onto the learner work transfer, which is where you submit the candidate's work, you must include a signed by the teacher and the candidate sheet for both components. And a copy of that example is shown on the left-hand side of the screen. The screenshot in the middle shows you how to find the authentication form under Course Materials and Forms and Administration. So you go to sort of Course Materials, Forms and Administration, and then you see the authentication sheet. Any use of artificial intelligence must be referenced in candidate submissions. They must then develop work independently beyond any AI input, evidencing their own creative skills and knowledge. And Pearson have recently updated their AI policy to include GCSE International Art and Design. So the screenshot on the right of the screen, you will see where to find this under Forms and Administration, and you can see the AI policy there highlighted in yellow. Clear guidance for acceptable use of AI can be found in this document, and I'll just be showing some examples of this soon. So the AI policy for international art and design. So AI tools such as ChatGPT and Midjourney and all AI-based tools built into existing software like Photoshop becomes more prominent. Pearson have provided some guidance and information on its use by learners. And Pearson understand that these powerful tools are being used as a valid part of creative work, but that there are also inherent risks to its use, particularly in an educational or assessment context. It is important that learners understand the appropriate and ethical use of AI in creative contexts to be prepared for the future in the creative sectors. But it is critical that they develop and demonstrate their own skills in generating ideas, research, and use of technical and practical processes independent of AI input. The JCQ guidance published on the use of AI states that all work submitted for qualification assessments must be the student's own. This means ensuring that the student's submission is their own work and is not copied, paraphrased, or heavily derived from another source, including content produced by AI tools. And both the teacher and student are required to sign a declaration to this effect, and this is the authentication sheet, which I've just shown you. Links to the AI policy and the recorded training event on AI art and design qualifications is in the slide. but I've also shown you where to find the document on the homepage. So, referencing sources in candidates' work. So as we said, AI tools may be used appropriately as part of candidates' research and or as a means of exploring techniques and processes. In the example on the left of the slide, the candidate explains clearly that the image was generated using AI. As the candidate writes, as I don't have any opportunities to take pictures of soldiers, I generated this picture using AI, which proved to be very useful in my project as it allows me to generate unique pictures that are specific to my theme. And in the 2024 series, many candidates had used digital platforms, including Procreate on an iPad, to photograph their drawings or sketches and then manipulate and explore a range of creative options using Procreate's digital tools, as you could see in the example on the right-hand side. I'll just pause on this so you can have a closer look. Okay, Jacqueline has produced a range of resources for centres on the website, which includes a selection of bite-sized videos covering a range of helpful topics. And these short videos are excellent reference to support you in delivering this qualification. Videos available including evidencing the assessment objectives holistically, assessment objectives 1, 2, 3, and 4 explained separately, drawing guides for three-dimensional design, graphic communication, photography, textile design, and also a video on administration, which is also very useful for you. So I urge you all to, if you can access this, I think most people can access the YouTube videos. Jacqueline, am I right thinking that? No, it's just China that.
Yeah, so if in China, I know that there's an issue with YouTube. So all of the videos that are on all of our playlists, both this bite-sized video playlist and our recorded training and events, as well as if you deliver the A-level bite-sized videos, and for any centers that are the GCSE, everything's been shared with the regional reps in China, and they are making that available to centers through a different platform. So you'll just need to get in touch with them. But I sent them an updated email yesterday so that they know of any new ones that have been added.
Thank you. The Principal Examiner Feedback Report. This report reviews the 2024 series of the International GCSE Art and Design and summarises feedback from the examiners. And you'll find this under Course Materials and Exam Materials, Examiner Report, Paper 1, as you see on the screenshot on the left side of the screen. It would be really beneficial if you could all read this report, as it gives you valuable insight into examiners' observations and reflections on the series, including the strengths and areas of improvement of the work marked. So here are some quotations from the report that feedback from examiners. So when candidates approach each assessment objective individually rather than a holistic and integrated way, meeting the objectives in a sequential manner, the work can become a series of exercises and the sense of journey and development of ideas is fragmented. We touched on that a little earlier. Some candidates showed low levels of basic skills and understanding of materials and media, and centres should use the exemplar gallery on the Pearson website to understand the levels of achievement required to meet the common standard in all assessment objectives. A clear understanding of the international GCSE art and design specification requirements, good teaching, well-structured courses, and appropriate resourcing ensures that candidates perform to their full potential in both components. So that's a snapshot, but there's a lot more information in there when you read the full report. Okay, so we've got to our further support available from Pearson. And as this is Jacqueline's area, would you like to explain about how they can sign up for your updates and all the other wonderful things available?
Yes, absolutely. So you can always get in touch with us on the Pearson support portal, as well as teaching art and design at pearson.com. And one of the team or I will get back to you on your response. In addition, we offer subject advisor catch-ups, which the link will be on the slides there. where you can book a 15-minute Teams catch up just to discuss any center-based questions. And those details are also on the qualification page under the contact details box. I also publish a monthly subject advisor update. So the January one was sent out by email to those that were signed up to the updates yesterday. And they're always on the main art and design and media page on Pearson. So you can review that, and it's always stuff that is relevant to the time period. So this update is all based on component 2 and support resources available to help you with the starting points for the period of sustained focus and exam conditions. So I recommend having a look at that. And if you want to get those to your email directly, you just need to sign up for the updates, which are also on the link is also on the qualification page, but also in these slides. We also have our new Edexcel Art Design Facebook group, which I highly recommend joining. And that is a place for teachers to discuss ideas. People are sharing materials with each other. I'm there to answer any general questions. Obviously, specific questions to your center still need to come through the customer support portal or the teaching art and design email. And then there's the links to the bite-sized videos and future training and events, as well as where all our recorded training, including these modules, will sit as a couple weeks after the event has happened.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jacqueline. So we're very near the end of the webinar today. And obviously I would just like to pass on my thanks to you all for attending, and I hope you found it helpful. Again, as Jacqueline's just said, if you have any further questions after this session, you could email the Teaching Art and Design team, and they should be able to help you. So we have a few more minutes left for questions, if anyone has got any in the chat box.
Is it possible to look at a fine art example, perhaps, really quickly?
Okay. Are you able to?
Yeah.
I mean, I can do it, but
Let me bring
you're
that up. I think most of the other questions were answered. I tried to
yeah.
answer them in the chat. I see Victoria said she's tried the team chat, but somehow I'm not posing the question correct to receive response. Can you help?
I'll have a look.
Victoria, I recommend emailing me at teachingartanddesign@pearson.com so that I can help you individually. That's usually the best port of call because it comes through to the art and design queue, which I'm on. Right, I'm just bringing up the exemplar gallery. Share. Every time I have to look for it.
There are a lot of fine art, or there should be. I know that at the moment we're currently updating our exemplar gallery. So most of the samples that you've seen in Module 1 and Module 2 will be on there. There will be new ones being added very soon, I believe. That's right.
They're meeting right now as we speak.
Okay.
And I'm going to be joining them after this. So yeah, they are in the works. So
Great.
look out for the emails and the posts in Facebook group. I put the Facebook group link in the chat in case you wanted to join
Great.
right now.
Thank you.
So here's the art design and media page. Here's the January update, and here's all the contact details that were on that last slide that you might need. So if I go to International GCSE Art and Design, Exemplar Gallery, I'll check out a Performance Band 6. This fine art one, I think you went through last year's module, is that
Yeah, I
correct?
did. Yeah, I went through last year. So that should be on the recording for last year's Welcome to Pearson.
Yeah, so if you go to the recorded training link, you'll be able to see an explanation on that fine art exemplar there. And then this might be a good one to look at very quickly.
This is a
This was
really
a 67, not a 72. I got it wrong. So that one received 16 for AO1, 17 then for AO2, AO3, and AO4, giving a total of 67. It was mostly exceptional ability, and for AO1, just exceptional ability. And the keyword descriptors from the taxonomy that were highlighted were highly skilled, inspired, sophisticated, and powerful.
Question here on, could you please tell me what are the things to improve in fine art to achieve good marks? I think in fine art that it's always good to have good skills in recording, and understanding of how to apply different media in the terms of evidencing your visual language skills and understanding of the formal elements. Again, it's really good to look at these exemplars to see what other candidates have done. But I think really focusing on the core skills in component one on drawing, which underpins all our art and design qualifications, is really important. And I think if the candidate develops those observational skills and looks at a range of artists, experiments with different drawing styles, different painting styles, maybe applying the same criteria to techniques like printmaking and also photography. Understanding composition in photography is an important part of developing their understanding of the formal elements. Digital exploration can often be a useful tool in composition development, and then taking that forward into a range of drawing and painting media. I think component one is a really good opportunity to build on these skills throughout the course, and then the candidate should have a good range of visual language skills when they come to component two. But again, it's up to the centre how you devise your courses and how to put in place those opportunities for your students to develop these core skills in the titles that you're following.
Thank you very much. I see the 3-pot exemplar was surprising. Is that this one? Yes. So this is an exemplar that actually will be coming down just because it is very unclear. You can't actually read what this annotation is down here. So we don't, this exemplar was when we used to do postal submission. So the examiner marked this in person with the artwork, and then they had done some photographs to make some exemplars, but the writing's not clear to us now because it was a physical piece of work from previous that we no longer have. So we won't be, it's not really helpful because we don't actually know the depth of analysis that is within the annotation. So it will be coming down and being replaced with something that's more helpful and supportive so that it really illustrates the AOs.
Question from Nicola. Are students able to pencil out and make a start on the AO4 exam prior to the exam and then finish it in the exam? No, you're not allowed to put any marks on the paper or the support you're using for the exam. You could sketch out the composition in the preparatory studies, follow that. And you could always use a projector as well. Some of my students use a projector to project the image onto the canvas at the start of the ESA, but you're not allowed to actually make any marks or start the final outcome before the 10-hour period of sustained focus.
So this question has come up previously quite a bit last year. So we came up with very open guidance around that because it is very much dependent on each individual learner's creative journey. So the question to ask is, if it is technical making preparation, then it can be done prior to the 10 hours. If it is part of the creative making process of the outcome, then it needs to be done within the 10 hours. And the assessment team and senior team have agreed that it is the teacher decision, who knows the candidates best, the projects the best, and the lines of inquiries best to make that decision of whether it's a technical process or a creative making process. So you should decide what is technical prep and what is creative process making based on each student's line of inquiry. And then you just need to make a note on the side of what was created during the 10 hours and what was done prior to the 10 hours. They're all assessed holistically. It's not like the 10-hour piece is assessed separately, because AO4 could find marks within the preparatory studies in terms of final outcome planning. So it's not like AO4 is just what's done in the 10 hours. So you just need to put a note on there of what was done as technical prep and what was actually created during the 10 hours.
Thank you, Jacqueline. There's a question here about how to send off the art physically. Well, this is all now, it's all digitally submitted on the learner work transfer, and advice on how to photograph the work is in our digital submission guide. So hopefully that will answer that question. We're coming very close to the end of the session. If there is something that you think about after the session, you can get in touch with Jacqueline on the teaching art and design at pearson.com. Also, have a look through both components if you missed yesterday's, because some of the questions that are coming up today were covered in module 1 yesterday. As we're getting to the end of this session, I would just again like to thank you all very much for attending, and I hope you found this really helpful. I'd like to thank Nash, for our event moderator today, for looking after us all with the technical setting up of the webinar and looking after everyone's needs. I'd also like to thank Jacqueline very much for being my co-host today and sharing all her wisdom with the knowledge of our our homepage and all the wonderful new resources that we have added since Jacqueline started working for Pearson, which is really supportive for our centres and is greatly improved and continuing to be improved. As you know, we're updating the exemplar gallery, and Jacqueline, I'm sure, will let centres know when this exemplar gallery has been updated and it's ready for you to look at. I want to wish you lots of luck with component 2 and your students lots of luck. Do watch the component 2 video that Jacqueline has produced, which is again really, really helpful. And I think that's all we need to say. But again, it's been really great having you in this webinar today with us. Thank you very
And
much.
thank you, Lindsay. You've been a fantastic training and host. So it was lovely to see everyone, hear everyone, meet with everyone today. I've put the Facebook group again as one last link, just because that's the quickest way to get any new news, and then obviously my monthly update as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for attending.